I can't believe I found you!
To escape my ex, I got into a stranger's car, not knowing it belonged to a mafia boss. I had a small backpack, a switched-off phone, and 3 years of fear locked in my chest. On that rainy night in Chicago, I ran from the man who called control love and got into the first black car I saw. "Please, drive," I whispered. Only afterward did I notice the man beside me. Dark suit, scarred hands, eyes too cold to belong to just a stranger. I thought I had escaped a cage, but maybe I had just stepped into the territory of an even more dangerous man. Hi, I'm Lena. A special shout out to those of you watching Book 1 for free here on the My Stories platform, completely ad-free and uninterrupted. Chapter 1. Long Sleeves in the Rain. The bruise on my wrist was the exact color of a forgotten plum, purple at the edges, green in the middle, yellow where his finger had pressed down hardest. I tugged the sleeve of my scrubs down before pushing the night shift door open, counted to 3, and walked in with the smile I'd had ready since home. The hallway smelled like pine disinfectant and reheated coffee, that mix I could recognize with my eyes closed. Noor was at the front desk, her hair pinned up in a crooked bun, jotting something down with a pen between her teeth, the fluorescent light flickering once before steadying over the white of the counter. "Sorry, I know I'm late," I said before she even looked up. "It was the bus, I swear. 3 minutes, Mira. 3. She pulled the pen from her mouth and pointed it at me. "You apologize for the air you breathe. Knock it off." I laughed the laugh I'd learned to use. Low, contained, the kind that doesn't take up space. I grabbed the clipboard off the counter, felt the familiar weight of the metal clip in my fingers, and walked through the cardiology wing, swapped out an IV bag, adjusted the cannula of an old man who always called me sweetheart, and smelled like hospital soap. He gave my hand a little pat, and I pretended not to notice the sleeve riding up a millimeter more than it should. In the break room, I broke a roll in half, ate one half, and tucked the other in my scrub pocket. It was a gesture without decision, as old as the fear itself. The bread sat there, pressed against my thigh, like a promise that if the night turned on me, I'd have something. 3 years with Raphael Sorin had taught me that math. He held bouquets for photographers and broke mirrors when the front door closed. He smiled at judges, lawyers, reporters, and at night, I learned to breathe quietly, so I wouldn't wake the beast sleeping in the bed next to me. "Brilliant prosecutor," the paper said. "Generous," said the mother-in-law I'd never had the courage to call by name. Me, in my long-sleeved scrubs, I knew another adjective. I didn't say it out loud or even inside my own head, because even thinking it felt like something he could hear from across town. That night, when the shift hit the slow stretch before dawn, the receptionist brought up an envelope. It was manila, rectangular, with one corner crumpled from the thin rain that had started falling outside. "Came for Raphael, but they sent it here. Can you take it?" I took it without thinking. The sender was a county clerk's office. The name was printed in capital letters, in that kind of official ink that turns your stomach before you even open it. I went up to the break room, sat in the green plastic chair pushed against the wall, slit the seal slowly, like peeling off a stuck bandage. The pages slid into my lap like dead fish. Deed. Small house at an address I knew by heart. Old neighborhood. Blue porch. Jasmine my mother had planted before she got sick. Transferred to his name. Signed by me, in handwriting that looked like mine but wasn't. Dated weeks back. I remembered the week. We'd gone out to dinner. He'd asked me to sign a bank document, and covered the body of the paper with his palm, while he passed me the pen. I read it 3 times. The last thing that had been mine was now his. The house where I'd been born, where my mother used to light a candle on my father's birthday, where I kept in the drawer the photo of Tomas Valente holding a wrench in front of the shop. All of it turned into his name by a pen that hadn't even been mine. I didn't cry. I'd learned early on not to cry at work. I just folded the pages with surgical calm, slipped them into the pocket opposite the bread, smoothed the fabric over them so no one would notice the bulk, and went back down to finish my shift. My steps on the linoleum sounded lighter than I felt. Inside, something I didn't know how to name had just lifted itself off the floor. When the shift change bell rang, I caught the bus home. Fogged windows, the smell of wet people, a child sleeping in her mother's lap 2 rows ahead. I climbed the 3 flights of stairs to his apartment, because the elevator had been out for a week, and he still hadn't complained to the super, which was strange, because he complained about everything. I opened the door with the key he'd once given me like it was a favor. Raphael was in the kitchen, barefoot, white shirt open at the chest, pouring wine like he'd just gotten back from somewhere elegant. The low music on the radio was an Italian singer he said he liked to seem cultured. The smell of fresh basil and expensive olive oil drifted from the pan on the stove. "You look pale," he said, without turning around. "Did you eat?" The clerk's office sent an envelope to the hospital. My voice came out lower than I wanted. He turned slowly. The smile came before the answer, like always. He approached with the calm of someone who knew I wouldn't run in that room, set the glass down on the counter, raised his hand, and pinched my chin between his fingers like someone holding a crystal cup that might crack. His fingers were cold from the glass. His thumb made that small, practiced pressure under my jaw, in the exact spot where no one sees a mark afterward. "Baby." His voice was straight out of a soap opera. "I did this for you. You forget the bills, you forget the property tax. It was financial protection. You know I take care of things. The house was my mother's. The house is ours. It's protected in my name." He squeezed a little harder. I felt my teeth click inside my mouth. "You're worked up from the shift. Go take a shower. I'll heat up dinner." He let me go, kissed my forehead with the rehearsed gentleness I'd seen in other people's wedding photos, went back to pouring wine. I went up to the bedroom and shut the door. I sat on the edge of the bed with my hands over the folded pages in my pocket, feeling the thick paper against my fingers. I looked at the closet, at the window where the rain ran down in uneven threads, at the mirror that still had a nearly invisible crack in the corner, a souvenir from a night he swore had never happened. The crack rose diagonally, thin as a hair, and I knew its angle by heart. If I stayed one more day, I'd lose the last thing I had already lost without knowing it. I stood up. My legs trembled once and steadied. I pulled the small backpack out of the back of the drawer, the one I'd kept empty for months without daring to name to myself why. I packed what I needed: 2 changes of clothes, the photo of my father, my bank card, my ID, a pair of dry socks rolled inside my spare sneakers. I switched off my phone, took out the SIM card, snapped the SIM card in half between my nails, listening to the dry little snap of the plastic giving way. I slipped the backpack under my shirt, tugged the scrubs over the top to hide the bulk, and opened the bedroom door. "I picked up an extra shift," I said from the hallway, controlling every syllable. "I'll be back early." "Sure, baby." He didn't even turn around. The sound of wine being poured kept going behind me like a soundtrack. I went down the stairs of the building with my heart pounding in my throat, counting the steps so I wouldn't think about anything else. I caught a cab to the hospital, paid in cash, asked the driver to drop me off a block before the main entrance, slipped in through the back of the service building, crossed the locker room where a damp towel was still hanging, left my badge on the bench like someone closing a chapter. I went out through the back door that opened onto the parking lot, the one nobody used after midnight. The rain had started light. The floodlights of the lot lit up the puddles in yellow discs, and the asphalt smelled like motor oil mixed with wet dirt. Raphael was standing between my old car and the concrete barrier, no umbrella, hands in his coat pockets, calm as a man waiting for fresh bread at the bakery. His hair was already plastered to his forehead from the rain, but he didn't seem to have noticed. He was looking at me the way he looked at witnesses in court, right before he made them contradict themselves. My whole body stopped working for a second. The air came in too cold through my lungs. "Mira," he smiled. "I knew you'd try. How? I know every step you take, baby. I'm a prosecutor, remember?" He took a step. The heel of his shoe hit the puddle with a muffled sound. "You're making a scene. Get back in the car. I'll drive you home. Raphael, please. If you scream," he went on, gentle, didactic, like someone explaining a simple rule to a stubborn child, "everyone will think you've snapped. You've been on emotional leave since last week. Did you know that?" I arranged it. Another step. The rain thickened a little between us. "No one is going to believe you. I didn't decide to run. My body decided for me." I went out the side gate of the lot, crossed the sidewalk without looking, turned the corner before he could finish the sentence. The rain came down hard all at once, like someone had cranked open a faucet in the sky. My sneakers soaked through at the first curb, and the cold water climbed up my socks to the ankle. I ran 2 blocks with no destination. The headlights of cars turned into gold and red blurs, horns, a woman in heels complaining about the rain under an awning, a hotel doorman with an umbrella trying to hold the revolving door for a couple of tourists laughing at some joke I would never hear. At the next corner, parked in front of the most expensive hotel in the city, I saw a black car. Long, polished, with the rain running off the hood like fresh varnish. The back door was cracked open for an instant, like someone had just stepped out and was about to get back in. I looked behind me. Raphael turned the corner 3 blocks back, walking unhurried, certain I had nowhere to go. His coat swung in the wind, and even from a distance I recognized the rhythm of that stride. It was the stride of someone who had caught up to me before. I looked at the car again. The door was still cracked open. Chapter 2. The Wrong Door. I didn't think. Thinking was a luxury I no longer had. I crossed the sidewalk in 3 steps, yanked the door open, climbed in, and slammed it shut behind me. The leather of the seat was warm, dry, with an expensive smell that didn't belong to my soaked body. It was a smell of dark wood, of something bitter and elegant I had never been able to afford in any store, mixed with a note of rain that had come in with me and gotten lost in there like an intruder. I curled up against the opposite door, my hair dripping onto the upholstery, the backpack clutched against my chest. "Please drive," I whispered, without looking to the side. The driver, up front, didn't turn his head. There was a silence that lasted a second longer than it should have, a silence that wasn't an absence of sound, but the choice of someone who had decided not to answer before measuring the ground. That was when I looked up. Next to me, on the same seat, was a man. Dark suit, black shirt with no tie, broad shoulders kept tight in the space like a man already used to fitting into cramped places. His hands rested on his knee, large hands, with thin scars cutting across the knuckles, one of them paler than the other, with the texture of skin that had been rebuilt over something that shouldn't have happened. He was looking at me with no surprise at all, as if a soaked woman climbing into his car at 11 at night was just another turn in the road. His eyes were the kind that didn't need to blink to intimidate. They were dark in a way that absorbed the streetlight instead of reflecting it back. The word died in my mouth. I'm sorry, A knock at the window. Raphael, his open palm against the tinted glass on his side, his face pressed close, his wet hair stuck to his forehead. He was smiling in that way only I knew, the smile of a man who had already decided what was going to happen to me before he even caught up. "Mira." His voice came muffled through the glass. "Mira, open this door." He knocked again, harder, and the sound echoed inside the car like a head hitting a wall. "Sir, excuse me, that's my fiancé. My runaway fiancé. She's having a breakdown." I flinched on reflex. The bread in my soaked scrub pocket had turned to sticky dough against my thigh, a ridiculous, childish weight that suddenly reminded me of the woman I had been until 5 minutes earlier. The man next to me didn't move. He just extended his index finger toward the driver, in a gesture so economical it barely qualified as one. There was a low click. The locks on all 4 doors dropped at the same time, and the sound passed through me as if it were inside my own chest. "Sir," Raphael's voice climbed an octave, "I am a public prosecutor in this city. I'm warning you that I'll call the police if that door does not open in the next 10 seconds. You are obstructing." The man next to me turned his face slowly, not toward me, toward the glass. "She's not going with you." 4 words, low voice, almost bored, without leaning forward, without touching the glass, without needing to raise his tone. The sentence came out as if he weren't talking to Raphael at all, but filing his name in some drawer. Raphael went blank for half a second. I saw it happen. I saw the confusion cross his face before the prosecutor reflex kicked back in. I saw the corner of his mouth twitch in that small tick he had when he was losing a hearing. "Do you know who you're talking to?" "Yes." The man looked back at the front. "Idris." "Sir." The driver's voice was dry, almost mild. The car pulled away from the curb with the smoothness of someone who had made that move 1,000 times. No jolt, no visible hurry, as if the getaway weren't a getaway, but a scheduled appointment. I looked out the rear window. Raphael ran 3 steps after the bumper, stopped, shouted something the rain swallowed, pulled his phone out of his pocket. 3 blocks later, he was a dot under a streetlight. I didn't let go of the backpack. I couldn't peel my back off the door. The water ran from my hair into the collar of my scrubs, and I felt every drop like a needle sliding slowly between my shoulder blades. The man beside me kept looking forward, as if I weren't there, as if that little circus act was the most routine part of his night. "Sir," I began, and my voice came out shaking. I owe you an apology. I'll get out at the next light. I just needed—" "Miss," the driver said, without turning his head. "I drive. I don't collect tolls in apologies." I blinked. The man beside me let something slip through his nose that might have been a laugh, but never quite shaped his face. It was so brief a sound that a moment later I doubted I'd heard it. "Idris," he said, "take the upper route." "Sir." The city slid past the window in wet streaks, headlights turning into lines, storefronts turning into blurs of color. The wind pushed the rain sideways against the glass, and in the distance the L-train structure cut through the night above the avenue, lit cars gliding over the rusted pillars. I swallowed hard, gripped the backpack, and asked the question that needed to be asked before the silence smothered me. "Who are you, sir?" He turned his face. He looked at me for a beat too long. I held his gaze because I had already learned with Raphael that lowering your eyes costs you entire nights of being made to pay for it later. Tristan Vere. The last name dropped through the car like a stone into a well. I didn't repeat it. I didn't need to. I'd worked in a Chicago hospital for 5 years. Names nobody pronounces twice you learn through the osmosis of night shifts, through gunshot patients who come in with no ID, through older nurses whispering over coffee with the cup pressed to their mouth so the sound won't leak. Vere was one of them. I had already heard that last name in a hallway at 3 a.m, spoken by a resident who looked around before speaking and lowered his voice in the middle of the word, as if the hospital walls were witnesses he'd rather not wake. "And what?" I said, my voice steadier than I expected. "Are you going to charge me for this?" He tilted his head slightly. His mouth sketched something that wasn't quite a smile. "You're direct. I don't have time to be anything else anymore." He looked at me again, longer this time. I felt that look move across the wet sleeve of my scrubs, the backpack pressed to my chest, my dripping hair, and land somewhere behind my eyes where Raphael had never managed to reach. It was a look that didn't touch, but measured, and measured with the precision of someone who had spent a lifetime calculating how much each person weighed in threat, and how much they weighed in truth. "Vere family," he said slowly. "I'm what's left of it. I have enough enemies to fill a room. I have blood on my hands. My last name is better at closing doors than opening them. I'm not going to lie to you about that." I gripped the backpack tighter. The damp strap cut into my palm, and I was grateful for the small discomfort for keeping me inside my body. But there's an old rule in the house. He looked at his own hand, the paler scar crossing the back of it, and his gaze lingered there a moment longer than necessary, like someone revisiting an address they pretend to have forgotten. "No one is sent back to the executioner after asking for shelter." "I didn't ask. You whispered, 'Please, drive.'" His voice dropped another note. "You asked." I didn't know what to answer. The car turned right, climbed a ramp, entered an avenue I didn't recognize. The rain had eased. The wipers kept a dry rhythm against the windshield, a metronome beat that seemed to be counting my heartbeats for me. "I don't have money," I said. "I have nowhere to go. I have no way to pay you. I can't. I didn't ask for payment. Everyone asks for payment." He turned again. This time there was something in his face. Not pity. Pity I would have recognized from a mile away, because I had spent 3 years dodging it in my co-workers' eyes during night shifts. It was something else. Something older, more tired, like someone who recognizes from a distance a scar similar to his own and decides not to point it out. "Tonight you sleep in a room with a door that locks." He spoke each word as if weighing it on a scale only he could see. "Tomorrow, you decide what to do. If you want to leave, you leave. If you want to stay, you stay. Idris takes you wherever you ask, no questions." "Why?" He didn't answer right away. He looked forward. The avenue lights crossed his face in yellow pulses, sculpting for an instant his hard jaw, erasing it again, returning it to the shadow. "Because I just left a meeting with people who want me dead," he said finally. "And even so, you got into this car. Anyone who runs like that is running from something worse." I looked at his hands resting on his knee, at the pale scar, at the shirt sleeve covering a wrist that was hiding something I didn't know what. I noticed he wasn't wearing a wedding ring, wasn't wearing a watch, wasn't wearing any of those ornaments. Men with power tend to display like diplomas, just the skin and its marks. I didn't trust him. I couldn't. But I calculated, with the coldness 3 years with Raphael had taught me, that between the cruel known and the dangerous unknown, the unknown still gave me margin. Margin was the word. It was little, but it was more than I'd had in the last 1,000 days. The car left the avenue, turned into a narrower street. It stopped in front of a building with no sign, just a tinted glass door and a doorman in a black suit, who looked at the car and lowered his head before Idris had even cut the engine. Tristan opened his own door, stepped out into the drizzle, walked around, and opened mine. He didn't offer his arm. He didn't call me by name. He just opened it, took half a step back and gave me space, and the space shocked me more than any gesture would have. I didn't move. He waited. No hurry. The extended hand didn't ask for mine. It just pointed outward, like someone showing a way out. I got out with the backpack glued to my body. The drizzle settled on my face without weight, and I realized, with a small jolt, that it was the first time that night the rain hadn't felt like an enemy. The glass door opened on its own. The doorman kept his head down. I crossed the lobby behind Tristan, behind the low sound of his shoes on the marble, and stopped in front of the private elevator that opened before any button was pressed. The lobby was huge and silent, with high ceilings and a golden light coming from somewhere I couldn't pinpoint. There were no plants, no armchairs, no anything that suggested welcome. It was a place designed to pass through, not to stay in. In the elevator mirror, I saw my reflection for the first time that night. Hair stuck to my face, scrubs transparent at the shoulders, eyes too wide. The woman in the mirror didn't look like me. She looked like someone I had once taken care of in the ER who had walked out without saying thank you. Next to me, Tristan was looking at the closed door, not at me, but I felt his attention the way you feel a hand hovering near the back of your neck without touching. I had just traded one cage for a territory whose name no one repeated twice. And for the first time in 3 years, I wasn't sure which of the two would be worse. Chapter 3. Bad Soup. The private elevator opened into a room that seemed larger than the entire house I'd grown up in. High ceilings, floor-to-ceiling glass, Chicago blinking down below. Idris carried my backpack as if it weighed something. It didn't. Tristan walked ahead, unhurried, without looking back to check that I was following. "Master bedroom is to the right," he said, stopping in the middle of the hallway. "Guest room to the left, kitchen there, balcony in the back, that door," he pointed to a dark wood door at the end of the hallway, "stays locked. My father's old archive, something from another time." I looked at the door too long. He had already turned his head before I looked back. "The guest room," I said. I almost apologized before speaking. I swallowed the syllable. "Please." Tristan didn't comment. He just tilted his head, and that was all. The room was small by the standards of the penthouse and huge by mine. Queen bed, white duvet, an armchair, an open closet with empty hangers. On the bed, 3 boxes, new clothes with tags, folded as if an entire store had been carried into that room while we were riding up. An open velvet case with delicate earrings, a pair of sneakers on the floor, exactly my size. I sat on the edge of the bed. I didn't cry. I was too tired to cry. I pushed the case aside with my fingertips, as if it were a live animal. I closed the lid. I left the room without unpacking. I found Tristan in the living room, standing in front of the glass, hands in the pockets of his suit pants. No jacket. His rolled-up sleeves showed the scars on the backs of his hands, and something a little darker running down his left wrist, hidden by the shirt fabric. "I'm not going to use them," I said, with the steadiest voice I could manage. "The clothes, the jewelry, I don't want to owe. I brought what was mine." He looked at me for a stretch that felt calculated. There was no challenge in his face, no irritation, no relief. "Then don't use them," he answered. "They're there if you need them. They're not there because you owe." He walked to the dark wood dining table, opened a drawer, took out a set of keys and a white envelope. He set both on the table, carefully, like someone leaving bread on a windowsill for a wary bird. "Elevator key, room key, money for whatever you want. I don't need a receipt." I looked at the table. I looked at him. I'd been waiting all night for the bill, and it didn't come. The delay made me more alert than if it had. "And what are you going to want?" I asked. "Sooner or later." Tristan turned his face to the glass. The line of his jaw was sharp in the light. "I want you to sleep," he said without looking at me. "For now." I didn't sleep in the bed. I took the glass of water to the living room, sat on the couch, leaned my back against the cushions, and stayed there, the glass between my hands, the lights low, the breath of Chicago outside. Sometime in the early hours, I heard the door of the master bedroom open and close, bare feet in the hallway. Tristan stopped at the doorway of the living room. He didn't turn on the light. He didn't come in. I pretended to be asleep. He stood there for maybe 3 seconds. Then he stepped back. I opened my eyes to the darkness and counted to 100 before breathing deeply again. 2 weeks passed like that, like water seeping under a door. I learned the noises of the house, the low hum of the refrigerator, Idris's heavy footsteps on the living room rug, the voice of a security guard in the service hallway, deeper than I'd expected. The first time he raised his tone at another man, I dropped my glass of water on the floor and apologized 3 times out loud before realizing I was alone. I cleaned everything up. I sat in the kitchen. I put my hands over my knee to stop trembling. Tristan saw the broken glass. He didn't comment. He brought another glass, identical, left it on the table. "The glass shop delivers in the afternoon," he said. "If you want to break a few more, feel free. There's no shortage." It was the first thing he'd said that resembled humor. I didn't laugh, but I kept the line the way you keep a piece of bread. The apple was another afternoon. I picked it from the fruit bowl in the kitchen, bit off half, wrapped the rest in a napkin, and slipped it into my scrub pocket. I didn't realize he was leaning against the kitchen doorway. When I looked up, he was there, standing, and he was looking at my pocket. I felt the shame climb up my neck and my ears went hot. "Sorry," I whispered. "Mira." It was the first time he'd called me by name. His voice came out lower than usual, as if he were weighing each letter. "The fruit bowl is yours too," he said. "Take as many as you want. You can fill both pockets if it comes to that." He left the kitchen without waiting for an answer. I stayed leaning against the counter, with my hand closed over the scrub pocket. The apple pulsed in there like a small heart. Noor showed up that first Friday. Tristan had sent a car for her. I hadn't asked. He asked if I wanted to see anyone. I said her name, and 3 hours later Noor was stepping out of the elevator in high heels, leather jacket, eyes wide. "Girl." She spun in the middle of the living room, took in the glass, the view, the couch, the security guard standing in the distance pretending not to listen. "How did you guys find me, girl?" "My phone rang from a number that doesn't even exist on Google." She shook her head. "This place looks like an October magazine cover. I don't know whether to scream or ask for the Wi-Fi." I laughed. It was a short, surprised laugh that came out before I authorized it. Noor sat on the couch with one leg tucked under her, like the whole penthouse belonged to a cousin of hers. She ate 3 cookies, looked me in the eye. "You okay?" "I'm here." "That's not what I asked." I gripped the glass of water tighter. "I'm learning to be here," I said. Noor didn't push. It was the only thing she could do that would actually help, and she knew it. Before leaving, in the hallway, she squeezed my hand. She didn't say anything. Neither did I. Tin Oren Ver arrived the following Sunday. I was in the living room when the elevator opened. I recognized the last name before I recognized the face. An older man, gray suit, trimmed white hair, a smile rehearsed over decades of long tables. He kissed my hand before I could pull it back. His lip was dry. "Miss Valente," he said, stretching out the last name in a way that made me pull my wrist back on reflex. "Valente, what a pleasure." Tristan spoke of you with attention. Behind me, I heard Tristan's breath stop for half a second. When I turned, his face had already gone back to normal, but the pause had been there. I read it as respect for my father's last name, for the shop nobody in that house needed to know about. "Uncle," Tristan said, and the word came out sharper than affectionate. "She doesn't take formal visits. I only came to pay my respects." Oren smiled at me, smiled at him. "The house feels different with a woman inside it." They went into the study. I stayed in the living room pretending to flip through a magazine that wasn't in my hand. I heard the door close. I didn't hear the conversation. When they came out, Oren stopped in front of Tristan in the hallway and lowered his voice just enough for me to catch it. "You're changing too much because of her." Tristan didn't answer. He just opened the elevator door for his uncle and waited for him to step in. When the elevator went down, Tristan stood facing the closed panel for a weighted moment. When he turned and saw me in the living room, something in his face adjusted too quickly, like someone closing a drawer before a person walks into the room. That same afternoon, a silent young man delivered an envelope. He couldn't have been 30. He looked at me like he was on the verge of telling me something, and gave up on the last syllable. Tristan took the envelope, thanked him with a nod. The young man left through the service elevator without touching the walls. "Who is he?" I asked. "A courier. He's worked for us for years." He looks at me strangely. He looks at everybody that way. Tristan turned his face. "Don't worry about him." I worried about him, but I kept the worry in the same pocket as the apple. So, on the Monday of the 3rd week, I forgot to eat dinner. It was unintentional. I'd spent the day reading a book Noor had sent. I sat on the couch with the book at 4 in the afternoon, only got up once to drink water, and by the time I noticed the hour, it was nearly 11. The penthouse was quiet in a way I was beginning to understand. A soft knock at my door. Not the bedroom door. The door of the living room where I slept, sitting up. Tristan was on the other side, holding a bowl with both hands, as if the bowl were harder to carry than everything he had carried that week. "Soup," he announced without ceremony. "It's not good." I looked at the bowl. The broth had a strange layer of fat on top. 2 pieces of carrot floated, poorly cut, one bigger than the other. A timid smell of garlic rose toward me. "You cooked?" "Cooked is a stretch." He held the bowl out. "Idris wasn't here. The house had nothing else ready. I remembered you hadn't eaten." I took the bowl. It was warm in both hands. "Why did you remember?" Tristan took a moment to answer. He didn't step back from the doorway. He didn't come closer. "Because I remember," he said simply. "Good night, Mira." He turned his back. His broad shoulders disappeared down the hallway. I stayed there with the bowl in my hands, the warmth passing through my fingers, and the strange feeling that this wasn't a polite man's gesture. It wasn't exactly, I thought, polished kindness. I sat on the couch with the bowl in my lap. I ate slowly. The soup was bad. It had too much salt on one side and none on the other, as if he'd seasoned half the pot and given up on the rest. I ate all of it. I wiped the bowl with the sleeve of my scrubs before taking it to the sink, and when I passed the study door, I saw the light on under it. Tristan was inside. I didn't knock. I left the clean bowl on the kitchen counter, turned upside down, the way my mother taught me. I went back to the couch, turned off the light, turned on the TV at low volume just so the silence wouldn't keep me awake with my own thoughts. It was 1 a.m. when Raphael's face appeared on the screen. I sat up straight. The remote fell to the floor. He was in a blue suit, gray tie, in front of microphones. Behind him, the courthouse facade. The banner at the bottom said, "Prosecutor asks for help locating fiancé taken by criminals." Raphael was speaking in the voice he used in public. That voice that made people believe him in the first second. "My fiancé suffered a breakdown," he said, looking at the camera with the exact eyes he had when he was about to grab my chin. "She was taken by dangerous men. I'm asking anyone who knows any information to come forward. She needs medical care. She is not in any condition to make decisions." The camera closed in on his face. He held back tears the way you hold a flower. He didn't shed a single one. The empty bowl had left a damp mark on the kitchen counter. The apple was still in my pocket. The security guard in the hallway passed by and coughed. Somewhere in that penthouse, behind a dark wood door, was an old archive from another time. And on the television, in front of me, the man who knew my every step was asking an entire country for help in coming to fetch me. Sut. Chapter 4. Stitches at the Kitchen Table. The morning headline was worse than the late-night video. Idris handed me the paper without comment. I laid it on the breakfast table. Chicago prosecutor accuses criminal organization of holding fiancé captive. Below it, an old photo of me, smiling at a gala dinner I had hated. I didn't even remember smiling. Tristan came into the kitchen in a gray dress shirt, no tie. He looked at the paper, looked at me. He didn't pick it up. "Did you see?" I asked. "I saw it in the middle of the night." He poured coffee into 2 cups, pushed one toward me. "It's going to get worse before it gets better." "How can it get worse?" He looked at me in a way that said he already knew exactly how. The hospital phone rang 3 hours later. Dr. Halsey, voice softened by pressure, words chosen with the same forceps he used to remove stitches. "Medical leave. For my safety, while the situation gets cleared up." I thanked him, apologized on reflex, hung up. Noor called right after. Her voice had no humor in it for the first time in 3 years. "Girl, he came in here this morning, with cameras, said he'd come to get you." Halsey almost passed out. Pause. I spit in his coffee when he asked for water. It was the only thing I could do. I laughed without meaning to. An ugly, short laugh that hurt my throat. "Thanks, Noor. When you can come back, I'll meet you at the door." Another pause. "And, girl, watch out for that new driver of yours. Really, watch out." I hung up and stood in the living room staring at the glass. I remembered the hospital parking lot in the rain. I remembered the squeezed chin. I remembered the deed at the clerk's office. For a second I thought about calling my mother. I remembered I couldn't. That she was in a nursing home where they didn't trust the phone in her hand at night. That if she heard my voice like that, she'd try to get up. I sat on the couch. The tears came without warning. They weren't big tears. They were the small, angry kind that slide down the side of your face before you feel you're crying. Tristan came into the living room. He stopped. I had no way to hide. I wiped my face with my sleeve. "Sorry," I started. "No." He knelt. It was the first time I had seen a man that size bend his knees in front of me for any reason other than tying a shoe. He came down to my eye level, without touching. His scarred hands rested on his own knees. "You do not apologize for crying in this house," he said. "Not with me." I clutched the fabric of my scrubs between my fingers. "He's going to sink me," I whispered. "He has the office, he has friends, he has cameras. I have a piece of bread in my pocket." Tristan was silent for a moment. When he spoke, his voice came out slow, calculated. "I can take care of Raphael in one night, Mira." I lifted my face. He wasn't bluffing. He wasn't being dramatic. He was offering me a service the way someone offers to pick up a package on the way to work. The urge came. For one terrible second, I wanted to say yes. I saw his face in a ditch, I saw the courthouse without him. I saw my mother breathing without his name around her. And then I saw something else. I saw the next day's headline: Runaway Fiancé Linked to Disappearance of Prosecutor. I saw my life becoming, forever, a footnote in the story of another man who had decided for me. No, Tristan didn't blink. No, I repeated more firmly. I don't want to be avenged like I'm another man's property. I don't need him to vanish. I need to be believed. I need to be believed as a person, Tristan. I swallowed. Do you understand the difference? His eyes shifted by a millimeter. It was enough for me to see that I had entered somewhere in him I hadn't been before. I understand. He stood up slowly, walked to the window, stood with his back to me for a while. When he turned, he was a different man, even if in the same shirt. Then we do it your way. Over the following weeks, Tristan started using his contacts in a way I think he had never used them before. Phone calls in a low voice from the study, folders that came in through the front door instead of the service door. A man with glasses who shook my hand formally and said he was a private investigator. Another, younger, who talked about recordings with the casualness of someone talking about beans. It took 19 days before Tristan said the file was ready. That Thursday evening, he placed the folder on the living room table, thick, heavy. I came closer and sat at the table across from him. Here, he said, is what we got. 3 other women willing to speak. An intern, a colleague from the courthouse, a neighbor from his old building. There are recordings. There are copies of the forged documents, including your mother's deed. There are threatening emails he sent from a personal address. I stared at the folder. I didn't touch it. Whose name is this under? Yours. I looked up. You decide when, he said. You decide how. You decide if you show it. If I disappear tomorrow, this file is still yours. It was the first time in 3 years a man had put in my hand a decision that carried weight. Raphael had decided where we went for dinner, decided who I could talk to, decided whose name held the one house that had been my mother's. I looked at the folder in front of me and noticed my hand was shaking less than I'd expected. Thank you, I whispered. Tristan tilted his head. He left the room without asking for anything else. Charnay. It was almost 3 a.m. on Saturday when the elevator door opened, and Tristan walked in with his left arm pressed sloppily against his body. The shirt was dark at the sleeve. The jacket was gone. I was in the kitchen, glass of water in my hands, because I had already given up pretending to sleep. Sit down, I said, before he could say anything. Table. Now. He looked at me. For the first time I saw something close to exhaustion on his face. Mira. Sit. He sat. I went to the bathroom, grabbed the first aid kit I'd seen on the second day, came back, switched on the bright light over the table. I asked him with my head to take off the shirt. He unbuttoned it slowly, with his right hand. The left was open on the inside of his forearm, a long, deep cut, still bleeding slowly, dried blood around it. He'd tied a strip of cloth over it, and the cloth was soaked through. What was this? A meeting that didn't go well. Tristan. Knife. One of the Brankov guys. Pause. Already handled. I didn't comment. I cleaned it. He didn't flinch when the alcohol hit the cut. He didn't breathe differently. I turned my face toward the light and pushed the first needle in. I did it on reflex. My fingers knew. My mouth didn't. He watched me. It wasn't a look that demanded anything. It wasn't a look that intruded. It was the look of someone learning another person's face for keeps, in a dimly lit room in the middle of the night, with blood on the table between them. I made the 3rd stitch. I felt his breath rise a little. Felt mine, too. I didn't lift my head. Don't move. I'm not. You're breathing. That one I can't help. It was almost humor. Almost. I bit the inside of my cheek to keep from smiling. When I passed the gauze to clean the blood off the skin around it, I saw it. His shirt sleeve had ridden up. Inside his left wrist, an old mark. It wasn't a knife scar. It was a burn. Skin puckered the way only fire puckers, in an irregular pattern, hidden in the exact place a watch usually covered. I stopped my hand for an instant. He noticed. The fingers of his right hand moved to pull the sleeve down. They stopped halfway. I didn't ask. My eyes asked for me. Tristan opened his mouth. No sound came out. Closed it. His eyes dropped to my mouth, rose to my eyes, and at some point in that back and forth, the air in the kitchen got dense in a way I didn't know how to name. I was too close. His hand was too close. The burn was in my field of vision like a name I couldn't read. Mira, he began. Don't speak. It came out before I thought. His eyes adjusted to that word in a way that hurt him. It hurt me too. I need to finish, I said lower. The stitches. Otherwise it'll open. Finish. He pulled the sleeve down. The burn vanished under the fabric. I made the last stitches without looking at his face again. I cut the thread, placed the gauze, secured it with tape. When I looked up, he had already pulled something back together on the inside, like someone locking a door before a person turns the handle. "Done," I said. "Thank you." We sat there, on opposite sides of the table, him with his arm still resting, me with the needle already put away and my fingers stained. Neither of us got up first. It was Idris who broke the air, passing through the hallway without stopping. "Doc," Idris said without turning his head. "He's stubborn. Take advantage while he's quiet." "I'm a nurse, Idris." "To me, ma'am, you're a doctor." I laughed. It was low. It was short, but I laughed. Tristan paused mid-motion, getting up from the chair, looked at me like someone hearing rare music in a place where there shouldn't be any sound at all. Shame. The next morning, he burned the toast. I came down to the kitchen because the smell of burning had risen all the way to the hallway. I found Tristan standing in front of the toaster, with a bowl of beaten eggs in one hand and a dish towel in the other. Smoke was coming out of the toaster. 2 black slices were popping up, like the machine was spitting on the Mafia Boss of Chicago and didn't give a damn about the consequences. "Breakfast," he announced, as serious as in a family meeting. I laughed. It was the first time in my entire life I'd laughed without rehearsing, without asking permission, without calculating whether it would cost me dearly later. I laughed with my shoulders. I laughed with my belly. I brought my hand to my mouth too late to contain it. Tristan stopped in the middle of the kitchen. He didn't smile back. He just stood there looking at me, as if I were something he was about to understand for the first time. The bowl of eggs still in his hand. The burnt bread in the toaster like a joke he'd told by accident, and that had worked. "What are you laughing at?" "At you." "At me or at the bread?" "Both. At the same time. You can't separate them." He shook his head, set the bowl down, threw the black slices in the trash, grabbed 2 more, went back to the toaster as if nothing had happened. But I saw it. I saw how he turned his face a second before I turned mine. I saw the corner of his mouth lift a millimeter. No. That night, I lay down in the bed in the guest room for the first time since I'd arrived, without deciding. I just lay down, lights off, covers pulled up to my chest. He stopped in front of my door. I knew because his footsteps were different from all the other footsteps in that house. Slower, heavier, longer when they stopped. He didn't knock. He didn't come in. I held my breath. "You're still here." His voice came from the other side of the wood, low, almost without volume. That's already courage. The footsteps drew back. The door of his bedroom closed at the end of the hall. I lay there with my eyes open in the dark. My heart was beating in a way I didn't recognize. I looked for a name for it. I landed on gratitude. I repeated gratitude twice in my head. I forced the word to fit. It didn't fit quite right, but I insisted. The phone vibrated on the nightstand. Noor. I looked at the clock. Almost midnight. "Girl." Her voice was breathless. "Turn on the TV, now, the news channel. Raphael just confirmed to the press that he'll be at a charity event on Saturday. He's calling you by name, girl. He's calling you out to come." Chapter 5. Leave It to Me. 3 days after Noor's call, I still hadn't decided if I would go. The penthouse had that kind of silence that weighs on your shoulders, and I sat on the balcony with the dossier in my lap, turning pages I already knew by heart. Photographs with the corners marked by my fingers. Recordings catalogued on letterhead paper, transcribed in small print. 3 names of women willing to back up the truth alongside mine. The wind came in through the crack of the door and lifted the edges of the pages, as if even the air of Chicago wanted to read along. Raphael Saran had built an entire life on the fact that women like us didn't speak, and if we did, nobody listened. Tristan didn't pressure me once. He'd come into the kitchen, leave coffee near my hand, and go back to whatever silent meeting he had ahead of him. The cup always came warm enough to touch my fingers without burning, the way only someone paying attention figures out. Idris drove in silence when I asked for a loop around the block, and never asked where to. Noor called every day and said, in that way of hers, that if I didn't go, she'd go in my place in stilettos with a pen flashlight. On Thursday night, I found Tristan on the balcony looking at the city. The smell of fine rain rose from the asphalt 20-some floors below. He had his sleeves rolled up to his forearm, and the scar from the cut I had stitched myself was still pink under the low light. "What do you lose if I speak?" I asked. He took a while to turn his face. The light from the building across the street streaked his jaw in 2 parallel lines, pale and cold. I saw his Adam's apple rise and fall once, slowly, and his fingers tighten on the edge of the railing before relaxing again. It was a long silence, with the weight of something he swallowed in order to be able to speak. Speak. I'd rather know. That was how I decided. On Saturday, he waited in the living room while I got dressed. I chose a dark, simple dress, nothing that asked for attention. I pinned my hair up with a clip that had been my mother's, the enamel of the metal already chipped at the edges, cold against my nape. When I came out of the bedroom, Tristan was standing near the window, and for a second I didn't recognize my own body inside that dress. It was a body that no longer apologized before entering a room. "You don't have to do this," he said quietly. "I do." I tightened the strap of the bag where the dossier was. "But thank you for asking." He looked at my hand on the strap for a second longer than he needed to. He said nothing. He just grabbed his coat from the back of the armchair and held the door for me. Idris drove. The hall for the charity event was on the 3rd floor of an old restored building, and the thin Chicago rain wet the windshield with that patience of one who waits. Through the fogged windows, the city went by in patches of yellow light and headlight red. We went up. The double doors opened onto a long, pale marble hallway, and the sound of people arrived in waves. Calculated laughter, silverware, a string quartet at low volume, the thin clink of glasses meeting in the distance. Tristan walked next to me without touching me. I thanked him for that in silence. I needed to walk into that hall on my own feet. The entrance to the main ballroom had a dark gray carpet that muffled footsteps. Low chandeliers, journalists with badges pinned to their lapels, women in long dresses whose hems swept the floor. 2 black-suited security guards leaned against the side door, talking quietly, and a third circled near the stage with a radio at his ear. The air smelled of expensive perfume, melted wax, and the distant trace of hot food coming out of the prep room. I saw heads turn when they recognized me. The runaway fiancé from the newspaper cover, finally in public. That was the exact instant Raphael appeared. He walked in through the opposite doors like a man rehearsing a scene. Light suit, magazine cover smile. 2 men behind him who looked like improvised security. A reporter raised a camera. Another grabbed the microphone from the stage where, minutes before, someone had been talking about a children's fund. "Mira," Raphael said, his voice loud enough to fill the room. "I came to take you home." The room froze. I felt Tristan take half a step forward beside me. I felt the entire air of his body prepare to do what he knew how to do best, erase the threat in silence, without asking permission. The heat of his arm came near mine without touching. I lifted my hand. It wasn't a big gesture, just a palm turned toward him, near my waist, where only the 2 of us saw it. "Leave it to me," I said. Tristan stopped. I didn't look at him. I knew that if I did, I'd lose the courage it had taken 3 days to gather. I walked 2 steps forward, stopped in the middle of the gray carpet, and breathed the way I breathed, before inserting a needle into the wrong vein of a patient in cardiac arrest. I counted to 3 inside, the way I counted at the hospital. I felt the low heel of the flat sink deep into the fiber of the carpet. "Raphael," I said. My voice shook. It didn't matter. It came out. "You're confused," he said, opening that smile of someone who had already won this scene other times inside the house. "Come with me. We'll talk somewhere else." He extended his hand. 3 years of my life fit inside that hand. The flowers in public, the mirrors broken at home, the clerk's office, the chin pressed between his fingers one night in October, the headlines. I looked at his palm and realized it had shrunk. Not his hand, my capacity to fear it. I stepped forward, not toward him, toward the nearest journalist. "My name is Mira Valente," I said, more firmly than I'd expected. "I'm a nurse on the night shift at the hospital. For 3 years I was engaged to prosecutor Raphael Sorin." I pulled the dossier from the bag. The paper weighed less than I'd imagined. Here is what he didn't want anyone to know. The journalist took the folder with both arms, like someone holding a child. Raphael laughed. It was a strange laugh, too loud, and it broke in the middle. "This is ridiculous," he said. "She's being manipulated by—" A woman stood up from a nearby table. Short hair, gray dress, hands trembling on the edge of her napkin. "Helena Cardoso, his assistant at the office for 2 years. I quit the day he locked me in his office." Another woman, farther back, pushed her chair back. The scrape of wood on the floor cut through the air. Graying hair pinned up high, hand open on the tablecloth like someone steadying herself on the table so she wouldn't fall. "Sandra Mello, neighbor in 2019. I heard things through the walls I can't forget, and I didn't call the police because he was a prosecutor. Today I'm calling." A third near the stage slowly raised her hand. Younger, navy blue dress, low voice but one that carried across the room. "Anna, I'd rather not give my last name yet. But if that folder has what I think it has, I'm in there too." The room began to move differently. Cameras rose, microphones turned, waiters stopped halfway with their trays, and an entire glass tipped over somewhere behind me with a clear crack against the marble. Raphael took a step toward me, and that was when he made the last mistake of his night. He grabbed my wrist. His fingers found the exact old spot, as if my body's memory had drawn a target there. The sleeve of my dress rode up, and my own body understood the gesture before my head did. The memory of the pressure waking under the smooth skin. Clicks. Several. From several directions. "Let go," I said. He didn't let go. The pressure of his fingers increased, and I saw in his eyes the same old calculation, the certainty that I would not finish the sentence. "Let go of my arm, Raphael." It wasn't Tristan who pulled him off me. It was the event's own security, called by someone who had finally understood what they were seeing. 2 uniformed men appeared through the side door. "You don't know who you're messing with." Raphael's voice came out cracked, higher than usual, without the soap opera control. "I'll destroy the career of every one of you. Every one. Mira, look at me. Mira, Mira." His voice faded as they led him down a hallway I had never seen until that night. The echo bounced off the marble walls and then cut off all at once, as if a heavy door had closed at the far end. I stood there in the middle of the gray carpet with my sleeve still pushed up. Tristan appeared beside me. He didn't hug me. He just stood there, close enough for me to know, and held out his hand with the palm up, like an offer with no charge attached. I put mine on top, not so he could lead me, so he would know I wanted to leave through the same door I had come in. We crossed the room in silence. Cameras followed. I kept my eyes on the pale marble floor, counting the thin lines of dark veining between the slabs, the way you count hospital tile on a hard night. Idris was waiting in the car, with the engine on, and the wipers cutting through the rain at the rhythm of a tired clock. "Home," Tristan said. "Home," I repeated, quietly, and it was the first time that winter the word had fit me. We rode up in the private elevator without speaking. The mirror at the back gave me a woman I was still learning to recognize. The penthouse was in the half-light the system left on at night, and I walked to the middle of the living room, stopped, and only then did my body understand what it had done. My legs buckled. I sat on the floor, on the rug in front of the couch, and cried. I didn't cry for Raphael. I cried because the woman who had walked into that hall was the same one who, 3 months earlier, had whispered, "Please, drive," to a stranger in the rain. I cried because she had survived, because the bread in the scrub pocket that night had finally been forgotten somewhere in the bag, and I hadn't noticed. Tristan sat on the floor beside me, his back leaned against the couch, his shoulder near mine without touching. He didn't hug me. He waited. His hands rested on his own knees, open, turned up, as if he had learned somewhere that closed hands scare off women who cry. When I lifted my face, his jaw was tense in a way I had seen only a few times. The time I stitched his arm, the time he stopped in front of my bedroom door without coming in. "I don't know how to love without being afraid of destroying," he said, his voice low. "I learned everything wrong, but if you let me, I want to learn the rest with you." I lifted my hand, touched his face, the scars on his jaw, old, smooth under my palm, the stubble starting to come in rough on the line of his jaw. "I don't need a savior, Tristan." He waited. He didn't breathe. "I need someone who doesn't turn love into a cell." He closed his eyes for a second. When he opened them, they were different eyes. Not the head of the family no one repeated twice. Just a man kneeling on the rug of his own living room before a woman who had just taken a name out of the world's mouth. We pressed our foreheads together. We didn't kiss. I still couldn't. Not because I didn't want to, but because I needed first to recover what was mine before giving myself to anyone. Tristan understood without my having to explain. We stayed there, forehead to forehead, for a stretch of time I couldn't measure. His breath was close, warm, with that light remainder of black coffee he drank without sugar. Mine, finally, inside my own chest. Then he helped me up, brought a glass of water to the couch, sat on the floor beside my bare feet, his back against the upholstery. "Get some sleep," he said. "Will you stay?" "I'll stay." I closed my eyes. I didn't sleep, but for the first time in 3 years, I rested. At some point in the early hours, I felt the light weight of his palm settle against the side of my foot, without grabbing, just there, like someone confirming that the other was still in the same place. The next morning, the phone rang early. The gray light came through the window in cold layers, and the glass was fogged from the rain in the night. It was the lawyer Tristan had hired. The voice on the other end said the suit to annul the fraud had been filed based on the recognition of the forged signature, that the process had begun, and that the road to the house going back to my name would be long, but it was a road. I thanked him, hung up, and stood looking at the phone in my hand. Tristan was at the kitchen door with 2 cups, barefoot, his hair still messy, a clean shirt open at the chest. "What is it?" he asked. "The house," I said. "It came back." He leaned his temple against the doorframe. He smiled in the way he had learned to smile only in the last few weeks. Small, contained, as if his face still didn't have the muscles for more than that. "Then it's a good day," he said. I looked at him with the 2 cups in his hands, barefoot in his own kitchen, the steam rising slowly in front of his jaw, and understood something I hadn't understood yet. There was nowhere left to run, and for the first time, that didn't terrify me. Chapter 6. To Anywhere I Get to Keep Being Free. The next 3 weeks came slowly, the way good things usually come. Dr. Halsey called me into his office a few days after the event. He adjusted his glasses 3 times before speaking, and when he spoke, he did it slowly, like someone walking on glass. He apologized for the forced leave. He said he had read the wrong headlines like everyone else, that he had believed words from a man in a suit, and that this was something he would carry for a while. I sat in the leather chair, pretending to look at a diploma on the wall, because I didn't trust my voice yet. I told him I could go back on shift whenever he needed me. I went back on Friday. I walked down the emergency hallway with the badge on my chest and my head held high for the first time. The linoleum floor shone under the cold ceiling light, and the smell of antiseptic, which for years I had associated with refuge, went back to being just a smell. Noor opened a bottle of grape juice at the nurse's station, as if it were champagne, poured it into a disposable cup, and toasted loudly, without caring who was watching. "To Nurse Valente," she said, "who came back and this time came back whole." I laughed. It hurt a little in my chest. It hurt good. Someone clapped at the back of the hallway. Another colleague walked past in a hurry and touched my shoulder without saying anything, and that quick touch was better than any speech. I drank the entire cup of grape juice in one gulp, and the sweet taste lingered in my mouth all night, mixed with the mild adrenaline of knowing that place was still mine. On Saturday, I went to my mother's little house. I came in through the crooked iron gate, which creaked on its hinge the same way it had creaked when I was 7 and coming home from school. I walked the stone path I had known since I was a child, counted the steps without realizing, and stopped in the middle of the garden and looked at everything. The flower beds had died. The porch needed painting, the old blue peeling off in strips, exposing the gray wood underneath. The kitchen window was sealed with white tape, opaque with dust, but it was mine. The deed had come back to my name 3 days earlier, in a plain envelope from the clerk's office, and the smell of the house was still my mother's. Coconut soap, old wood, something sweet I had never been able to name. I spent the entire afternoon there. I pulled out the weeds with my own hands. I felt the dirt push up under my nails, the root suddenly giving way, the light smell of rain stored in the soil. I replanted the basil, the mint, 2 rosemary plants I bought along the way. I cleaned the porch with a wet cloth, opened every window, let the wind in to lift the dust in thin columns dancing against the afternoon light. When the sun started to drop, I sat on the front step, drenched in sweat, dirt on my wrist, and cried without quite knowing why. Before I left at the end of the day, I promised the house I would come back. It was the first promise I made without needing to ask permission. I went back to the penthouse at night. Tristan was on the balcony, sleeves rolled up to the elbow, elbows on the railing, a glass of wine balanced between 2 fingers. He didn't turn when he heard me come in. He knew, by the sound of my footsteps, that it was me. That occurred to me as a small detail, and at the same time too big to fit in my chest. I walked over and stopped beside him. The city blinked down below. Headlights, lit windows, the dark river in the distance cutting Chicago into 2 black lines. The October air was cold enough to make my breath cloud the edge of the glass. I took the wine he held out to me without asking. It had been a long day. My hands smelled like dirt. I replanted the basil, I said. I know. He pointed at my coat sleeve with his chin. You brought half the garden over here. I looked. There was dirt on the sleeve, a thin trail of dark brown stuck to the cotton. I laughed. He smiled without looking, in that way of his, with just the corner of his mouth, as if smiling fully were still an effort he was getting used to. We stayed quiet for a while. It was a silence different from my old silences. It didn't have fear inside it. It had the sound of the lights below, of the wind hitting the fabric of the curtains behind us, of the calm breathing of the man beside me. I want to say something, I said. He turned just his face. I'm not here because I owe. My voice came out firmer than I'd expected. I'm not here because you took me out of the rain, or because the house came back, or because I'm afraid of being alone. I thought about this all week, Tristan. I thought about it in the bed in the guest room, in the hospital hallway, inside the car on the way to my mother's house. I'm here because I choose to be. He looked at me a second longer than he needed to. His eyes, in that light, were darker than usual, and I saw inside them what he would never have the courage to say out loud. Okay, he said quietly. Just that? Just that. He turned his body toward me, slowly. You don't need more. I felt the words settle somewhere deep I had given up tending. There was no irony in them, no exchange, no bill to be paid later. It was the cleanest answer a man had ever given me in my life. I leaned my head on his shoulder. It was a small gesture. It was everything. I felt the fabric of his shirt against my cheek, the warmth underneath, the controlled beat of his heart that for the first time I let cradle me without cataloging as a threat. He lifted his hand slowly, like someone afraid of startling a bird, and brushed a strand of hair from my face. His scarred fingers, rough on the edges, traced the line of my temple with a slowness that was almost a question. The tenderness with which he did it didn't match those hands. That was exactly what made it beautiful. I lifted my face. He kissed me. It wasn't the kiss of haste, nor the kiss of relief. It was the kiss of someone who had waited months, who had counted every night standing in front of a door without coming in, who had learned a new kind of patience without any lessons at all. Slow, lingering. His hand rose to the back of my neck and stayed there, not gripping, just holding, as if holding were the hardest verb to learn, and he had finally understood the conjugation. I closed my eyes. The wine in the glass tilted on the railing. I didn't care. The cold of the city back there insisted on existing and lost. When we pulled apart, he rested his forehead on mine. We stayed like that for a while, two of us breathing the same air, with no one in a hurry. You're still here, he said quietly. I know. I took his hand and brought him with me into the penthouse. I felt his fingers wrap around mine with a new firmness, no hesitation, as if he had spent the whole year waiting for permission and had finally decided to accept it. The door closed behind us. I woke up the next day in his sheets. It was the first thing I noticed. The smell, slightly different from mine, some mix of cedar and expensive soap, and the light coming in through the wrong side window, whiter, higher, crossing dark curtains and falling in crooked stripes onto the wooden floor. I stretched my bare foot under the duvet and it found his ankle. Tristan was still asleep, mouth relaxed, one arm folded under his head, the other stretched in my direction even in sleep, as if his body had learned on its own to seek mine before consciousness ordered it. I lay there watching his breathing for a while, the rise and fall of his chest, the pale mark of an old scar beneath his collarbone, dark hair falling over his forehead, and something inside me, that had been trembling for years, stopped. It wasn't a beautiful moment, the way movies paint them. It was a still moment, and that was exactly what I needed. I got up without making a sound, put on one of his shirts that was on the chair, rolled the sleeve up to the elbow, and walked barefoot down the hallway. Idris was leaning against the counter drinking coffee, and when he saw me in a loose shirt and bare feet, he pretended to pay attention to something very interesting at the bottom of his cup. It was his trained discretion in action, that way of seeing everything and pretending nothing. Good morning, Miss Valente. Good morning, Idris. Coffee? He was already holding out a cup before I answered, and he placed it on the right side of the table without asking. I looked at the cup, looked at him. He just tilted his head, as if there were something of fundamental importance to national security happening on the counter. You know I notice these things, I said. You notice too many things, ma'am. He drank. Comes with the profession. I laughed, sat down. The counter stool was cold under my legs and the coffee smelled good. Tristan appeared at the kitchen door a few minutes later, barefoot, hair messy in a way I'd never seen, with a black shirt open at the chest, and the expression of someone who hadn't yet decided whether he'd woken up. He looked at me from across the counter, and his small smile appeared before he noticed. It was a smile he hadn't been allowed to give before, and he discovered that he was, and the discovery sat there on his face for an entire moment. Idris cleared his throat and said something about checking on something or other in the car. He left, taking his cup with him. The two of us stayed. Where do you want to go? Tristan asked. Today? Today, I thought. Looked out the window. Chicago was bright in the morning for the first time in weeks. No rain. With that washed blue the city gives only a few days a year, the kind of sky that makes anyone believe starting over is possible. Anywhere, I said. I just want to walk. He leaned over the counter and looked at me in silence for a while, in the way of someone who answers without needing a word. That was his answer. Idris drove. Tristan sat in the back seat with me and held my hand between both of his, in the middle of the seat, as if that hand were something he had waited his whole life to be allowed to touch. I looked out the window. The streets I had crossed running 3 months earlier slipped past slowly on the other side of the glass. The hotel, farther ahead, the pale stone facade with the red awning. The corner where the door had opened by mistake, or by fate, or by some combination of the two no one would ever untangle. I looked at the corner and it didn't hurt anymore. It was just a corner. To anywhere I get to keep being free, I said quietly to the glass. He squeezed my hand. For a second, before I smiled, a small thought crossed my mind. It was strange that a man so used to keeping things would look at me sometimes, with the look of someone still keeping one. It was a single breath. I pushed the idea away in the same instant, because I was at peace, because he had asked where I wanted to go, because nobody was deciding for me for the first time in years, and because a morning of washed sky in Chicago is no place to feed ghosts. I leaned my head against the glass, closed my eyes, felt the cold glass at my temple, the warmth of his hand around mine, the low engine of the car gliding beneath us. The car turned onto the avenue and rolled on through the Chicago morning. For the first time, there was nowhere to run. I almost believed that Tristan Vare was the only dangerous man capable of keeping me safe. He set my cup on the right side, bought the bread I liked, and looked at me as if I were the first clean thing inside his world. I almost believed I could trust the most dangerous man in Chicago. I almost believed I had tamed the monster, until an envelope with no sender arrived. Inside, there was a photo of my dead father, an old report, and Tristan's handwriting in the margin. Cold, precise, unmistakable. Case closed. That night, I realized that the man who had taught me to breathe without fear was the same man who had taken my father's last breath. The absolute shock came. The man who made me moan his name every night was the same one who had ordered my father's death. The man I had spent years trying to get over, believing he had gone to heaven. And now the penny dropped. I had spent the last 3 months letting him have me every night, as if he were my savior. I let him into me, into my life, into my trust. He thought he had broken me. I'm going to show him what a broken woman is capable of when she decides to take her revenge.